now is all about a chance to hear from the students who have been using Chatter. We also have Anna on the phone from Salesforce Chatter, who can, along with Kendall, represent some of the company answers to maybe some of their questions. And you guys as well, feel free to ask the students who are the users, any questions on your mind. Anna, are you out there? Can we hear you?
I am. Can you hear me?
Fantastic. So thank you very much for joining.
I'm so happy to be here.
Great. So before we go into that panel, I'm going to hand over to Eric Markus, who's a second-year student. As I said, when the second years and first years were all here in full, and we had introduced this new system, there was a discussion about, do we have too many communication systems at Tuck? And Eric led a piece of work researching with the students into what the problem is, what the recommendations are. So I'm going to hand over to him for 5 minutes first to take us through what they found. And then I will moderate a discussion with the students and with the guys from Salesforce. So Eric, over to you.
Thanks, Stephen. So as Stephen said, I'm one of the second years. I'm a member of the student board with Shiv and Blythe here. And when I came back to campus, there was a lot of chatter about Chatter. It was actually kind of a joke at our coming back meeting for second years. What is this new platform? What's it for? How does it fit in? As Stephen said, I think the CDO did a great job of introducing it to the first-year students. But for us as second years, as incumbents, it was this kind of new thing, and we weren't sure what to do with it. So in my role on the student board and my role as student leader, I kind of volunteered to step up and lead a group of students, including Shiv and some other members of the student board, as well as kind of technology leaders in the campus, to reevaluate the communication platforms at Tuck and find out what's the true place for Chatter. And that's a discussion that continued over several months and culminated in a set of recommendations that came out a few months ago. These discussions started with a bunch of focus groups that began with a question of, what is the state of communications at Tuck? And I think when you look at the words behind me, which were the words that we discovered or agreed on, that describe the state of communications at Tuck, they might describe your enterprise as well. So communications were exhausting, exhaustive, too abundant, redundant, excessive, etc. There was a lot of dissatisfaction for how many platforms there were, as well as how redundant and excessive they were. So in thinking about Chatter and in thinking about all of our communication platforms, our objective was to create a series of recommendations to integrate and streamline communications. In doing that, we first had to ask ourselves, what are the platforms and what are the types of communication? So you look at this next slide, you think about the various types of communication. There are many different types that happen at a place like Tuck. There are event announcements, there are event updates. There are important time-sensitive announcements, like, hey, there's an important meeting going on now, you have to be there. And there are more FYI, less important, less time-sensitive type of announcements, like, hey, an alum reached out, they want to talk to someone who has experience in frozen foods, who might be interested in talking to him. That's not the sort of announcement that has nearly the same level of importance. And you can see there's several other types of announcements down the line. But what really gets people are the how many different sources of information there are as well. So at a place like Tuck, there are clubs, there are interest groups, there's a career office, there's the program office, there is Tuck centers. So for instance, there's a center for private equity, there's a center for entrepreneurship, there's a center for media strategies. There are social chairs who organize events on campus, et cetera, et cetera. So there are multiple types of communication and multiple sources. When you compound the two, there's just a whole bunch of communication going on at Tuck. And then finally, there are communications channels. And as you see a partial list here. And one of the things we did is look at the strengths and weaknesses of each of the existing channels of communication, and then looked at the strengths and weaknesses of Chatter to see where it might fit in. And one of the themes throughout this conference I get is, what's the trade-off between Chatter and email? And we can just focus on that really quickly here. So email, has a lot of strengths, and we figured that it definitely still has a big role in how we communicate here at Tuck. Email is obviously simple to use. Everyone knows how to use it and has used it before. It's confidential and it allows that one-on-one communication with that security of knowing that it's just that one person back and forth. And you know, it's also, you know, very timely, and you have that own personal archive. You know, I know I'm one of those people who has to have a very clean inbox with those, very tiered structure folders. I know exactly how to get a piece of information that comes through my email. I know exactly where I store it, but it's only on my device. It's only on my computer. So the weakness is that, you know, it's abused. I spend a lot of time each day sorting through emails, as do my classmates, and the stuff that I have on my computer, on my email account, is only available to me. So when we thought about Chatter, we saw that it had a lot of complementary values to email that help, complement the strengths of email, but also kind of make up for the weaknesses. So, Chatter is collaborative in a way that email is not. You know, email is a two-way conversation. Chatter is an open source conversation. Chatter also has an archive feature, so that, you know, the content of my conversation with others on Chatter is available to other people later. They don't have to go through my email account to find it. And it's also, it's a way to make sure that non-time sensitive announcements and things that aren't completely relevant to everyone reach a more targeted audience. So we saw a lot of strengths and weaknesses in Chatter that we thought could make it a valuable part of our communications portfolio. So all of that led to a set of recommendations and watch-outs for how Chatter should be integrated into the Tuck community. And we took those recommendations both back to Becky, Stephen, the CDO, and more relevantly to the program office, who will be taking over the administration of Chatter going forward. The basic recommendation, the biggest recommendation, is that Chatter should become the primary source of communications and platform of communications for student groups on campus. And that's clubs, that's CDO, and other groups. So any communication that goes out should be put on Chatter, and any piece of information should go on Chatter as that one-stop shop for information. In order for that to work, you have to mandate that everyone use it. So it's kind of like Stephen said, you can't go in kind of tiptoe into the water. You got to make sure everyone's on board with it and teach them how to use it. In order to make that process as simple as possible, pre-install it on everyone's devices. So here at Tuck, everyone receives a laptop when they arrive for the first year. You know, the Chatter desktop app should be installed on that laptop when they arrive, just like Excel is or PowerPoint is. You have to make sure students know how to use it. Even if it's there, they might not know how. So provide a tutorial at orientation, for instance, about how to use it. But there are a few things to make sure, that it's complementary, not a substitute to existing communications channels. This is where the kind of relationship between email and Chatter is important. Email and Chatter, in kind of our line of recommendations, need to talk to each other. Because, as Stephen described, Chatter cannot completely replace email. A good example, let's say the soccer club. We have a soccer tournament coming up in 4 weeks. If the soccer club chairs say, hey, let's meet up at a soccer field at 3 p.m., see if it's available to play, let's all have a game there, that could be good for Chatter if you know exactly that it's going to happen at that place and time for sure. But as happened last week, if you go to the soccer field and find out that it's actually being used by another group, you need to send out a time-sensitive announcement over email to everyone to let them know that the venue has actually changed. So our recommendation was that Chatter and email need to talk to each other, and in the context of Tuck, that means that we like for Chatter to be able to send out emails from Chatter to students' email addresses, which is the functionality I think we're talking about going forward. And in order for that to happen, there needs to be an established process for synchronizing the Chatter group list and the email list on campus. Finally, there are a few watch-outs, most of which we've talked about a little bit. One, Chatter should not be used for those urgent communications like the one I just described. A lot of students use that daily digest to keep in touch with Chatter, which means they only really check Chatter once a day. So anything that's going to happen like right then, within the hour, within the day, Chatter is not a foolproof way at this point to get that message out. Second point also speaks to the compatibility of email. Right now, a lot of people operate their daily schedules based on their Outlook schedule, and right now Chatter and Outlook schedules don't don't talk. So again, that's another thing that hopefully will be another functionality that could be added going forward. And then finally, one-on-one communications that are more private or more sensitive. Again, those are ones that could either be taken to email or to chat or private chat. So that's just another watch out as you might consider implementing chatter going forward. 3 students joining me are all first years. I'll let Steve introduce them in the process, but they're the ones who kind of have been on board with chatter since the beginning. So I think as we were talking beforehand, we're confident that going for the next year, as they've had great experience in it, and as our next class who are joining next year have experienced from the beginning, some of the jitters that we as a second-year class experienced will be less pronounced going forward. So with that.
Great, thank you.
Unlike email and even our internal communication system, Tuck Streams, it really serves as an archive of what's happened over the year for any one group or activity on campus. So for me, it saves me a lot of time emailing other students, student leaders, and the CDO to find out what's going on with things. So for example, I'm a member of the consulting club. I'll be taking over the leadership of that next year. And I had questions about how certain events were run in the fall that I wasn't able to attend. So I was able to just go into the consulting club group and scroll back all the way back to September and see how events were described, what the feedback from people was, kind of what the discussion was, and didn't have to ask people to forward emails to me or track somebody down, get somebody on the phone to talk to me about it. Not only was the information there, but all of the conversation around it was archived so that I could see it. So for me, I think that's really fantastic, and that's where Chatter stands out as being a much better tool than email for our community.
So Facebook is a purely social environment. We want to maintain an environment where you can say whatever you feel like, post funny pictures from last night, etc. Whereas Chatter is a more kind of formal environment. From a club leader standpoint, I think you view them both as marketing channels, so you get your information for whatever event out through both. But as a user, an average Tuck student, I feel there's a lot of confusion as to why should I even go here? And this may not be my opinion, but things I've heard, okay, it's just another thing. And they haven't really put their mind to think about how useful it is yet. But I think that's really an adoption thing that maybe with every new class, if they come in and see how useful it is, realize and ramp up more. But I feel it's just more formal right now, and Facebook's a lot more social, interactive.
And that's just evolved through the use case. I mean, we didn't say
right.
do this for this and this for this.
Because we don't know who's on Chatter, who's looking
right.
at it, or it's.
And you feel that Facebook is a safe, informal place, even though in reality, there are probably some members of staff joining it and probably would notice if anything too extreme went on, and yet you feel that that's kind of safe for social versus.
Like the whole commenting feature that Chatter has, I don't think has been maximized. I feel I post some things, but it's just like a one-way still. It's not really becoming interactive yet. Maybe it's just going to take time.
What opportunities, if any, do you see to integrate Chatter into that part of the ecosystem?
So one quick thing I'll just mention, getting back to almost Kendall's point of tasks, one feature of Chatter we haven't taken advantage of is almost Chatter as a project management tool to create short-term teams around projects. I think there are a couple examples that we were talking about before. I think you led a trip to Green Mountain Coffee, which is sort of a project. But most of the groups that currently exist in Chatter are more long-term enduring groups. And the question is, how can we think about using Chatter for, if I'm working on a project for a class, or if I'm working on even within a club, working on a short-term project for that club. We haven't kind of seen the use case yet for that. But I think there definitely is one, especially if these kind of task management features could be added.
Also, one of our professors likes to use Twitter as a way for students to engage with each other and with the professor throughout the day. Unfortunately, I don't think Twitter is the best interface for that. You have to go and you have to search for the hashtag. And it's just a little bit clumsy, especially if you're not comfortable with it. Whereas if you could create a group for your class, that's a fantastic place to archive, a really interesting conversation around whatever topic you might have.
My only worry about that is that currently is somewhat limited number of organizations on Chatter. So there's like 130 or something. as soon as someone can create a group for any reason, that might explode, and then I won't be able to find the clubs that I really do want to find. And so that's my only worry about using it for small groups.
So there's the small group use case is very prevalent. In fact, there are a couple of universities, undergrad, that are specialized in different areas, and they do use it for group work in classes. So they put their class into a group, or their section into a group, or their study group into a group. And we use it also, the collaboration on records. So every record has a feed, and it's funny, the record can be the group. It can be the space that you collaborate. So, for example, I'm on a record for a specific feature. I mean, I use Chatter to build Chatter, which is interesting. We have let's take email integration. Email integration somewhere is a record. And all the people who are working on email integration, we have a lot of fields on that record. Are there bugs? Are we testing this? When does this go into pilot? All those types of things. And then we're having our conversation on that record feed. And because you don't use the kind of the structured data side or the follow side of it, that you're kind of using like a third. And you're using a very valuable third. You're getting a lot out of it, but it's interesting.
So you're chattering right on the topic as a separate entity.
I chatter like on a deal, for example. Like if I have a big deal.
Opportunity, you're chattering within the opportunity tab, right?
That's right. That's right.
And where do you do that? So the deal is not a group; it's a data object, and
You can show it. Actually, I was showing Steven just at the break. He can pull it up because it's right on his computer. Actually, if he toggles back over. So he was on something. What were you on? Yeah, it was Bain. Oh yeah, look at you. Now you're an expert on Smart Search. I love it. But it wasn't even just that. You were on the record, actually. So go back. I think is that the group?
Yeah, so this is the record of Bain & Company.
So this is a record. He set up Bain not as a group, but it's actually, you can see all the structured data. Here's the detail, here's the industry, here's the ideas, here's all the tags. But at the top, right, see how there's chatter? And you could hide chatter. But you could just as easily post a link or a file right there, and you could be collaborating on the record. And this is actually frankly, this is why people use Chatter versus, there's a lot of other tools that frankly do groups and do a lot of those pieces. But this is really the most powerful part of what we do, because this allows you to marry structured and unstructured data. And then you can follow this record. I really care about Bain, right? And now you can kind of collaborate on that. You can report on it, et cetera.